Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 17 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode was recorded on November 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For more information about the show, including the show notes for this episode, please visit straypointers.com. Joining the show tonight is Omaha Perl aficionado Jay Hanna. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're still not used to that aficionado title, are you?
No. Yeah, well, I wish I was still. I want to claim the Omaha Pearl Guy title. That's great.
I think you are. When I think of Pearl and Omaha, well, except that I'll ask you something in a bit. But did you ever take a Perl coding class in college?
No, I'm totally self-taught.
Well, the reason I ask is because I had interviewed Bob Fulkerson, a professor from University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he used to teach in Perl. He used to teach comp sci in Perl as kind of an intro class. And I know some folks that were his students back then, and they just they still love it to this day. They don't program in it much, but they have very fond memories of all that. So I was curious if that's where things had started, but we'll get into that. Now, you and I had brought this up when we crossed paths here on Mastodon. You and I had actually. You were the head of the Omaha chapter of a group called the Perl Mongers.
Correct. Yep.
And I had somehow come across the Omaha.pm mailing list back in 2005. And I posted a note to the mailing list, and you responded immediately. And there's a little bit of back and forth. I never made it to a meeting, but then I ran into you again. I started to go into some of the dynamic languages users groups meetings in Omaha, and you were present there often talking about Perl and chem chains and things. I thought this would kind of be a good get together. When I think of Omaha Perl, I do think of you.
Well, excellent. I apologize to Bob because he taught it. I've never officially taught Perl, but I do remember when I had been doing Perl for 12 years, 14 years or something professionally, when I met Bob and he was teaching it. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome, right? So he was teaching CGI, and some of the CGI stuff, according to the wizards, that we were going to a lot of Perl conferences back then. So annually I would go and watch all the argumentation about the correct way to do Perl and the web, right? And so those things have all evolved over time.
But there's more than one way to do it.
Right. Yes, there is. Do you know the motto? What are the three virtues of a Perl programmer?
I have no idea.
Laziness, impatience, and hubris.
that I didn't know. I must have come upon that naturally.
Yeah. So in the 90s, I don't know how far back you want to go, but in out of high school.
Well, let's start with your first exposure to computers and programming. When did that happen?
Oh, way back. So my dad had an IBM PC Junior that he bought because he was big on IBM as the brand, So when he bought a computer for the family, it wasn't the Commodore 64 that my friends had that had the cool games on it. It was the IBM PC Junior where the games were more expensive. It's not as fun. But MS-DOS Basic way back then were my earliest memories. And I remember the 3-color graphics of CGA. What was it called? CGA graphics?
Yeah,
is that right?
It was color graphics array or something along those lines.
Yeah, cyan
or adapter.
Green, and you only had 3 colors.
Right.
And the resolution was terrible. And
Now, was your dad a programmer?
No. So my parents didn't know anything about computers and still don't. So, every day I'm IT tech support for my parents. To this day, they're both still with us, which is amazing. And they're both as frustrated with technology as they have been since the 90s. But yeah, way back in the day, it was like I was in middle school or grade school even with the IBM PC Junior, and we got a 256 kilobyte memory expansion board, which was 1.5 feet long and 1.5 inches thick. And that was amazing to have another 256 kilobytes of memory.
Sure.
which is nothing now, obviously. But yeah, back then it was huge. And you had to take off the side of the IBM PC Junior, like unscrew the entire side of it. And the adaption board was 6 inches long. So a 6 inch long slot thing went chunk into and it was very expensive at the time to get
Hmm.
another 256 kilobytes of RAM. But yeah, way back then, and I've got I don't remember the name of the book, but I can find the reference for you and send it to you, and you can put it in the show notes. But programming MS-DOS basic games, like we would physically buy books that had MS-DOS written in them. So line 10, line 20, line 30, line 40. You would type all this stuff in, and it would be a game in MS-DOS. So yeah, that was my earliest experience. And then thinking I was a wizard in MS-DOS by coming up with some of my own graphics that I thought were fascinating. So I had it draw a series of lines that looks like it turns into a curve. So,
When did you first encounter Perl?
right. Yeah. So we'd have to jump past the IBM PC Junior. And then during high school, I ran bulletin board systems. So we moved after my freshman year in high school, we were living in a suburb of Detroit called Livonia. And we moved from Detroit to Sioux City, Iowa. And I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. And coming into the 10th grade in Sioux City, Iowa, every kid knows every other kid and they've known them for 10 years, right? And I was the outsider. And so I decided I was going to run a bulletin board system. And that's how I found my friends in high school, is other nerds. We were playing Galactic Warzone. These are BBS games with a phone line with the fun squealing noises and all that. And they would call into my bulletin board system. And
Did you write your own
uh,
BBS?
I did not write my own BBS. I was running Teleguard, I think.
Okay.
So yeah. So those were the early days. And then I think it was my senior year of high school or the summer before my senior year, there was a guy who was looking for computer help. And my friend and I had opened a retail shop where we were building parts. So if you remember Gateway in North
Hmm.
Sioux City, let's see, that would have been North Sioux City, South Dakota, right? Yeah.
They were in Iowa too. Weren't they in Sioux City, Iowa as well?
So there's Sioux City, there's North Sioux City, and there's South Sioux City. And so I don't remember the geography of which. So you actually cross the state line, I think, to get to Gateway.
They were the computers with the cow
Yep.
skin designs on the boxes. Yep.
And I worked there one summer. So we opened this retail store and we were assembling PCs, which was cheaper than you could get them anywhere, right? Because the affordable PC parts explosion had happened, and my friend was a big hardware nerd. I've never been a hardware nerd, but I love the software side of it and the programming side. But he convinced me and my parents to invest in opening a retail outlet in Sioux City, Iowa. And so I think it was called Comp Universe was the name of it. So we painted our own sign and shoved it on a building, and it was a very low budget operation. But yeah, we built a bunch of custom computers for people back when you could just open up a 2 inch thick catalog,
Hmm.
flip through these catalogs, buy the parts because this is how much memory they want, this is the disk they want, buy the case, everything gets shipped. We custom assemble your computer for you, and then you walk back into the store and grab it. And we had software on the shelves and all that stuff.
Was this all
So
out of the catalogs you mentioned? Was this Computer Shopper magazine?
it might have been, yeah, I remember it being 2 inches thick.
Yeah, every month it was 2 inches thick.
Yeah, it was amazing. But the amount of money you could save by assembling your own, but most people don't want to do that. Most people don't know how, the various parts work and how to assemble them. So we would do that for people, obviously, and mark it up the price and thought it was good money. And obviously it went bankrupt because it was two high school kids running a retail shop, but a very small retail shop. Anyway, so after that summer, or the summer before my senior year, maybe, um, I heard a guy was looking for help with computer stuff. And I went down there and met him somewhere downtown Sioux City, Iowa. And he said, I need you to program this website to do this thing. And this was way early. This was 1993. And I said, I don't have any idea how to do that. And he handed me a book, and it was O'Reilly, and it was Programming Perl. And he said, here you go. And I've still got that book. It's on my shelf over there. But yeah, he handed me Programming Perl and said, here, figure it out. So I figured it out. And then I programmed Perl for the next, I don't know, 30 years or something. So
Now,
yeah.
do you have a formal education in comp sci?
I don't. I went to Iowa State University and was very frustrated by the computer science courses at Iowa State University. Switched majors 3 times, dropped out 3 times, and then got a job working up in Yankton, South Dakota, for uh, a company who was going to Gateway, getting pallets of parts that they had overstocked or they were just getting rid of them or whatever, and paying 10 cents on the dollar for all these parts and then reselling those out on the extremely early internet. So that would have been 1996. That was my first job out of college. Yeah.
Okay.
So
And then how did that unfold into your early career in Perl?
well, so the first job was the reason they hired me is they said, "Oh yeah, we need this inventory on the internet." Well, at Iowa State University, they had computer labs that were really cutting edge at the time, and they had a thing called the internet. And so I was creating websites on the internet when NCSA Mosaic came out and 1.0. That was when suddenly websites had images in them. That was crazy. This was my freshman year in college. And so when that came out, Iowa State University already had a system in place where they would give you an account on their Unix systems, VAX systems. I don't even remember the
Yeah.
name. I've got
Yeah,
the old manuals.
they were big Vax they were a big Vax school, yes.
Yeah. So you'd create an account. You'd say, yes, I want a public homepage. And your account would then have a tilde public underscore HTML directory. And anything you put there was on the internet for people all over the world to hit. It was crazy. Like this was mind boggling because for years, well, for 3 years, I had been doing long distance phone calls via bulletin board systems on an old 2400 BPS modem, uh, to one person at a time, and then we'd have like mail relay chats or whatever. So we'd have a network, and the BBSs would have to dial each other to relay the messages around. And the fact that I could be sitting at Iowa State University, connected in multi-user dungeons to 50 people all over the world, put in the same RPG style, um, text based, all text. There's no images environment playing this game was mind-boggling to me for free, right? So the internet, we weren't paying long distance phone calls. So my parents got really tired of the long distance phone bills, and I got in trouble a couple times when things kind of spun out of control on the phone phone bill front. But yeah, so yeah, my very first job was they said, "Hey, we need somebody that can put our inventory on a website." And I'm like, "I can put your inventory on a website, right? As well as anyone can at the time, because it just started, like the tech just started. And I was in HTML doing bold tags. This was way before CSS existed. So you do a little B tag, and that's bold, and that's as advanced as, HTML got. So yeah, so the first phase of that job was, put the inventory on the internet, and I did. And it started selling pretty well. And then that snowballed rapidly because it wasn't very long before my website on the internet was outpacing their sales department, right? That was the scale. This was everybody's minds were exploding at the time in e-commerce, right? Because it brand new. This whole internet thing and the internet was getting popular. And that was huge. And then phase two was, we want to turn this into an auction site. So I wrote an auction site in ASP, what is now called ASP Classic. So a Microsoft Microsoft Stack, Microsoft SQL Server, what is now called ASP Classic, and developed so that part wasn't in Perl. The first one was, the second one was not. But developed a website, and that turned into an internet startup when we tried to raise money on NASDAQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my first job out of college.
Oh, very cool. So then you've done non-web Perl programming though. You've done some pretty heavy database stuff in Perl, have you not?
Oh yeah, yeah. So my probably the strongest skill set I have is database manipulation, and most of those stacks have been Perl stacks when you count up the years that I spent doing it. So yeah, I spent many, many, many years doing database manipulation. So we did run the website at like Omni Hotels, for example. We took over the licensing for the website that we were using, the vendor website. I was like, well, look, I can, if you give me that $4 million budget, I can do it way cheaper than that. And so we actually did that. We took over Omni Hotels and their affiliated brands. We rewrote all that in Perl. So that was all Perl. So that was web Perl, but that was all sitting back-ended in Formix database at the
Hmm.
time. So, yep. So yeah, and then a lot of my years have been REST API development in either Perl or Golang. That's been a lot of my more recent stuff.
Okay.
And then extremely recently, a lot of Python. I've gotten into a bunch of DevOps, but unfortunately, I haven't had anyone pay me to do Perl in a while. So
That,
I am very willing to program Perl for a living. If anyone wants to hire me to do it, I love Perl. It's great.
now, did you follow the Perl movement into Perl 6 and what's called Raku now?
Right. Yeah. So at the time, our company was a Perl consultancy, was a big chunk of our business, right? So this is a company called Infinity Interactive that I still work for. So I've been with Infinity Interactive for 13 years, and we were one of the big Perl consulting shops in the world. So we had some of the people, like the VP of tech, when they first hired me, invented the de facto object-oriented system or object orientation system for Perl 5, right? So he's like as big a celebrity as you could be in the Perl universe, next to Larry Wall, who invented the language, right? So after Larry Wall, it was my first boss that hired me. So yeah, sorry, what was the question?
Well, I was asking if you followed into Perl 6
Oh, yeah.
and what
Yeah,
became
yeah.
Raku.
Right, right, right. Yeah, so Perl 5, originally, because I started, I think, in extremely early Perl 5, if I got the timeline correct. And then what happened was there was a lot of features and backwards incompatibility that people were looking at. And so that was called Perl 6 for about a decade, I think. And after 12 years or something of calling that Perl 6, they rebranded Perl 6 as Raku, and so now it's referred to as the Perl family of programming languages. So a lot of the Raku and Perl conferences nowadays are combined Perl and Raku conferences because they have a lot of shared history. But the Raku interpreters, there's multiple Raku interpreters, last I heard, and the Perl interpreter are two different things. So the modern Perl now is version 5.40.0. That's current stable. So
Okay.
yeah,
So
but
let,
I've never programmed Raku. Like every year we would go to the annual. It's called YAP. It was called YAPC at the time. Yet another Perl conference in North America. So we'd go to YAPC. The whole company would go there, and that was our big annual meetup. And that was in Vegas several years in a row. And so we'd all be in Vegas as our corporate retreat at the Perl conference. So we'd do our Infinity Interactive stuff, and we'd do the Perl conference. And yeah, so every year someone would be presenting Raku, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool," and I'd be on my laptop while they're demoing Raku, installing Raku, get Raku working, and I'm like, "Oh, that's cool," and I'd play with a few syntax things, and that was about it. So I never had a business purpose to use Raku, so I never actually learned how to program Raku. So
let's talk a little bit about community. So I had alluded to the fact that uh, you were very active. Well, I think you were the leader of the Omaha Perl Mongers group back
yep.
in I think it was 2005 when I said I joined the mail list. You tell me a little bit about what the Perl Mongers are.
Right. Yeah. And I'm still I call myself the international Perl ticket monkey. So all of the Perl groups all over the world, I'm still the guy that keeps the website running and updates things. And so I'm actually kind of embarrassed right now because 2 months ago, the API for the Google Maps for the website broke, and I haven't gotten around to fixing it yet. It's on my list.
There's
In the
Perl work, man.
meantime,
You're
well,
wanting Perl work. Gosh.
it's JavaScript work. It doesn't pay nearly as well as my current DevOps nonsense that I'm doing. But yeah, so all over the world in several different languages that I'd try to translate, people would contact the Omaha Perl Mongers, the pm.org website. And we had hundreds of active groups that were changing all the time, and leaders would change. So we supported all the mailing lists, and so that most of those were mailman based. So I would be creating new lists. I would be doing administrator password changes, etc. It's all in a Git repo, so there's a huge XML file that contains all the configurations. So when people contact, I go in and mess around with the XML file and then flush the website updates out.
So Perl Mongers was a way for you. Basically, it was a series of localized Perl users groups, and the site that you're talking about was kind of a way to locate them.
Right. Yeah. So if I'm traveling to Boston, right, I could just pull up a map and see, oh, okay, there's one group or two groups in Boston or whatever, and I can click whichever one, and then from there I can see whether or not they're meeting that night, et cetera. So I could just swing by and say hi when I'm traveling, all over the world. So that was the idea. So the idea, I think, of the local user groups at all, like why I do it, is that I feel way more connected to the technology platform when once a month or something, I show up with other people who are using the same technologies, and someone gives a presentation, or there's just a bunch of lightning talks or whatever, and people just show what they're working on. And that's a very cool way to feel connected geographically to the work that I'm doing for my job, and so it's really neat. And I wish there were connections like that right now for all the tech stacks that I'm doing. But unfortunately, I'm not a JavaScript programmer. So I go to Nebraska JS, but I have no idea what they're talking about because they're, trying to work through the latest iteration of the 15 competing frameworks for the whatever. And I'm just kind of staring at it going, why was that like you're solving this problem that never should have been a problem in the first place? Like, why did you, and it's not their fault. They're like web dev is a whole universe of pain. So Nebraska JS is great, and you should totally come to those, and you'll probably see me there on the months that I can go. But I'm doing a lot of Python now, and there's no Omaha Python group. No one gets together to talk Python. No, I'm not. Wow. It's sad. Python. So many people use Python, and I'm using Python every day, but there's no group of nerds that I can just go hang out with and, eat a piece of pizza or drink a beer or, whatever. And, I'm doing just tons of Docker now, and not really. I'm doing a ton of AWS stuff, but when I go to the AWS meetings, it's not programmers. It's like people that are trying to, negotiate their way around how Amazon is currently working, right? It's like programmers have a very different perspective on the universe. We want to be like masters of our environments, and we want lots of control to be able to just meld these universes that we create into whatever shape we want them to be in, right? So when I'm really tearing it up programming, I'm creating these worlds within worlds of things that are totally under my control, and I can do anything. I can take, if something is not working correctly, I can rip that whole thing out and, just go crazy and see within 5 seconds whether I broke it or not. And I did. 95% of the time I broke it. Like the process of programming, it seems to me, is 95% it's not working. And at the very end, you're like, oh, okay, got it. And it works, and all the tests pass, and you're like, yay. But that's just not the environment in DevOps, right? It's a very differently paced situation. So yeah, I would love to sit with nerds once a month in a social environment to learn something and to show somebody something and that kind of thing. And that's what I did for years at 4 different user groups. So
the Omaha Perl Mongers group then metamorphosed into the Omaha Dynamic Languages users group, which was inclusive to it says dynamic, but I don't know that any language was really ever turned down if somebody wanted to speak there.
Oh no. Yeah, no, it'd be great. Like anyone was totally welcome.
what was the genesis of that? What caused that to change?
Well, so from my personal perspective, I wanted a user group just to talk about cool stuff and feel more connected to what are the new things that just came out on Perl. It's called CPAN, the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network. But every language has repositories of cool stuff out there that people already wrote this stuff. Great. Um, so I started the Omaha Perl Mongers just because there wasn't one, and so I was at my job talking to all the other Perl programmers, and I'm like, oh hey, why don't we just get together every third Thursday or whatever, and just have pizza and soda and whatever, and just talk about latest Perl stuff. And every single one of them was like, no, I'm programming all day, every day. The last thing I want to do is go to some nerd meeting in the evenings. And I'm like, oh, come on, it'll be fun. So I'm glad other people are open to doing that on occasion, because it really helps me to get other people's perspectives on what is going on in the tech. And when I can see someone else that has a different idea that I never thought of, that's huge. I mean, that might save me a week's worth of, mucking around or going down the wrong path or something. And someone else already solved it. And I'm like, oh, that's really clever. That's really cool. I love that you presented that. So, but yeah, so Omaha Perl Mongers, I ran that for years and years and years. And it didn't have to be Perl, but it was like, that was my focus because that's what I was doing. And there were other groups for other languages. And I'm like, well, let's have a Perl group. And I think what happened is after doing that for years, I just got tired of listening to myself talk about it constantly. And I'm like, okay, well, what we should have then is we should have more of an umbrella group that it can be any language. It doesn't have to be Perl. And we'll just as the Perl nerds, we'll just show up and invade the group, right? We'll be the Perl guys, whatever. And whatever solution they're talking about, we'll show how that works in Perl. So I think chronologically, we first started crashing the Omaha Ruby and open source meetup, right? After the Omaha Perl Mongers, we just said, oh, okay, the Omaha Perl Mongers, we're open source. We'll just be part of the Omaha Ruby and open source meetup, right? And so we did that for quite a while, and then that closed down. And then we're like, oh, okay, well, now where? So it was the Omaha Dynamic Language Users Group. And so we were there for a while. And then the other leaders left or moved out of town or whatever. And suddenly I was the leader again. And I'm like, oh my God, this is my third, the third group that I'm leading now by de facto. Everyone else left. So I'm the person that's still organizing. And then after OD Lug, it was OMG Code. So at the Omaha Maker Group.
Oh, that's right.
We showed up and did the source code version. So it was OMG, Omaha Maker Group, ! Code. Right. So then we did that for a couple of years, I think. I don't remember what ended OMG Code. But yeah, so I'm personally responsible for collapsing 4 different user groups in the Omaha Metro, and I want to apologize. I'm easy to get along with, I swear.
So I have to ask, were you at the meeting? I was not, but were you at the Dynamic Languages Users Group meeting where Randall Schwartz stopped by?
Yep. Yeah. You should have come to karaoke. We went to karaoke afterwards with Randall.
So Randall was probably the most prominent Perl guy around at one time, and he then became a prominent Smalltalk guy, and now he's big on Flutter and Dart, I think, are his fortes now. But so I missed that talk, and I kick myself for missing it. Do you have people, or were there people that were your idols, that were like Perl idols, or maybe just general coding idols back in the day?
Well, Stephen Little is his name, and he was one of the 3 guys at Infinity Interactive that invented this OO system called Moose. So Perl 5 doesn't have, well, I guess I can't say that anymore unless if you want to talk bleeding edge Perl 5, we can talk about that. But for years and years and years, there was no OO system native in Perl. So what do? Well, you invent one and you put it on CPAN, and then everyone downloads it and it works great, right? So that's what we were doing in production for decades. This thing called Moose. Well, Stephen Little was kind of the lead author, I believe. He would allow me to say that. I'll have to drop him a note and see if I'm screwing this up. But Stephen and 3 other guys at the time at Infinity Interactive were the core contributors to the OO system of Perl, which was huge. And I was burned out on the hotel industry, studying bioinformatics at University of Nebraska, Omaha, and then burned out on that, started my own consulting business. That wasn't getting much traction. And Stephen Little called me and said, "Hey, do you want to work from home as a consultant?" And that was crazy. That was like, I don't do sports, but that's like the most famous sports person calling you and asking you if you want a job. And that was nuts for me. So yeah, he was a huge inspiration to me because he'd be giving all these keynotes at the Pearl conferences about how we're so I've always been a developer. I grab tools and I use them for a business purpose. That's great. But there's a whole other tier of people that aren't just solving business problems. They're solving problems for the programmers that are solving problems, right? They're down a step in the stack, right? So the hardcore Perl people, yes, they're great Perl programmers, but they mostly are programming C because the Perl interpreter is written in C. And so you have to be a C programmer to really fundamentally do optimizations of Perl performance metrics or whatever. And every time I've tried C, I've been so unhappy. Perl's spoiled me since the 90s, so I just don't have the patience for C programming. But to watch a keynote, and it happens to be your boss, where they're talking about here's the 18-month plan of where we're taking object-oriented programming of the entire language that I've now been doing for my career for 20 years or whatever at the time, to watch them plan, here's the roadmap. We're stealing this awesome idea that we found from this language and this idea from this language and this idea from because Perl just unapologetically has always stolen from the beginning every cool tool, every cool thing from every cool tool that it found, like the best of breed across all computer programming. We're going to put that in Perl because it's so flexible. You can do that. So I think Stephen Little was one of my heroes, and I couldn't believe he offered me a job. So that was cool. Yeah,
That's very cool. What was your favorite or what was your preferred Perl development environment?
are you talking about IDEs like
Yeah.
the?
Hmm.
Oh, I was in Vim forever. So I had been in I had been in VI for so long that Vim was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And I'm not Nick Nisi NeoVim guy. And as Vim started doing all the syntax highlighting and stuff, and I'm like, oh, my brain, my eyeballs, I just can't. I kept turning it off, right? So even in Vim, I was turning off features that kept becoming the default because my eyeballs just couldn't get used to syntax highlighting. It's like, you're slowing me down. This is really messing me up, slowing me down. Just give me the standard VI commands because I've been doing it for so long. So nowadays I'm in VS Code and everything's massively highlighted. My IDE is enormous, right? And every once in a while my whole machine chugs and I'm like, what's going on? Oh, yeah, plugin number 572 spun out of control and my text editor doesn't work anymore. It's like, oh, great. So, but yeah, I was VI forever. I don't even remember what year I finally was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, syntax highlighting. But so as my career became less mostly Perl and this language and this language and this language, and we were doing Haskell and all the, we were doing all kinds of stuff. And whenever it's a foreign language, I want a fat IDE because the help that it gives me, because I don't know what I'm doing. So the help that it gives me visually and all the keyboard shortcuts that it does and all the auto indentation and, all these things. And it, squiggles all the bad parts and all that automatically. But I had been so long in Perl that I was just a Vim guy forever. So I think it wasn't really until Golang that I even got into VS Code or yeah, Visual Studio Code. Yeah. So I think Golang is what made me finally go, okay, well, I have to be in VS Code to survive Golang. And it has all these cool features for Golang. And now that I'm in VS Code so much anyway, might as well also use it for Perl editing. So that's how I ended up in VS Code.
Is there anything you want to say that we haven't covered?
Oh man. So why isn't there a Python group? Let's get one started. Who's that? Like everybody uses Python, right? Let's
Yeah,
do
they
that.
do. They do.
I want a programmer minded perspective for cloud stuff, right? Every like cloud meetup thing that I've gone to has been about how do we negotiate better contracts for better pricing tiers and stuff. And I'm like, no, no, no. I want to nerd out on the syntax, right? So now I'm in like Terraform most days, all day. And I'm like, where are the nerds who are doing Terraform stuff, like really hacking at Terraform? Because I'll show up at various meetups and it's like, well, here's how you can better interface with your customer support team. And I'm like, no, 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 I want to actually hack on it. So it just feels so strange to be totally disconnected. All the stuff that I'm doing doesn't have a local community. And it's great to have a local community. I love leeching off their knowledge, and I'd love to give little presentations on what I've been up to. And it always surprises me when somebody's like, that is cool. And I'm like, really? That's cool? Like, I didn't think that was the cool part. But other perspectives are just really valuable. So I guess my sales pitch is start a local user group if there isn't one, because whatever you're doing, there's probably other people out there. And if you start it, maybe you'll get a bunch of other people to show up to your thing. I did it for 20 years, so I probably shouldn't start more groups, but I've already killed 4 groups. I shouldn't kill a 5th group.
Do you think a Zoom-based meeting would fly? Would that be the same for you? Or would
um,
that be too much like work?
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's something about in person. There really is. Um, it's good to get out of the house. I work from home. I work from my basement, right? So I do
Hmm.
need to get out of the house. So there's the Omaha co-working group on every Wednesday, and I haven't gotten out there as much as I need to. I don't know. Need to leave the house more is my parting message, I think.
Great. Well, Jay, thanks for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, great. Thanks for the talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.